Hello, good evening, Bob.
Hey, how you doing, Hanny?
Very good. Another day, another controversial topic.
Oh yeah.
It seems we've got few to go through, but today we're going to talk about something a little bit. Remember, I told you offline, I'm not completely sure about this one here. I have an idea, but I could be swayed with some strong evidence. And I thought in the very final analysis, it's going to be an individual case sort of scenario because it is very hard to put a general rule on this particular one. So I want to first get your initial general impression, and then I'll ask you to move on to any evidence whatsoever in the Bible, be it the old book or the newer book, that has any reference to abortion whatsoever. But first, let's get your impression, your general gut feel about this whole thing, abortion.
Well, I know this is going to get me into even hotter water than I already am with some folks, but I generally oppose abortion. I consider possible exceptions, but I don't think it's right to make the exception into the rule, which is what seems to happen all the time. When I taught ethics in college, I what we it was like social ethics, and we dealt with various hot topics, and one of them, which is especially hot now given the Supreme Court situation in the United States, though that's coincidence. We had no idea that was coming. Otherwise, you'd think we leaked the opinion, I guess. Anyway, when I taught it, I was more of a politically liberal bent, and I tried to be a good liberal, and I was in favor of abortion being legal. But the more I got into the opposing arguments on both sides, talking with my classes about them, the less cogency I saw in the pro-choice argument, despite myself. And I finally wound up saying, I'm afraid I do think abortion is at least second class murder. And that, of course, that's not the intent with most people that get an abortion, because they have come to the conclusion that it's not a fetus is not a human being with rights. And so they don't view it that way. I understand that. I'm not trying to make them into giggling fiends who want to toss a baby onto the altar of Molech or any nonsense like that. But I do think it probably is a very tragic, terrible error that we have made, and that it's just adjacent to infanticide, which was very, very common in the ancient world and is now beginning to make a comeback. Now, these are not arguments yet for or against abortion, but this is kind of a little summary of how my mind changed on the matter. And so I know some people will only need to hear that I'm not, like I have said many times, I might venture to call myself a feminist, except that I don't believe in abortion. And I know that those who think they hold the copyright on the term will not consider anyone a feminist who is not pro choice or pro abortion. So I won't use that word in deference. So people probably do know it already.
Yeah. Well, this one here in particular is a bit dicey because I thought about it quite a lot as well. And I know sort of we are partners in a crime, if you wish, but the female is the one sort of going to have the custody for 9 months or so, and having to endure all sort of the intimate experiences of carrying a baby. But let's start from the very beginning. Let's start from the ancient world. Uh, well, obviously, human beings have held life to be kind of sacred, one way or another. Whether to give it away in sacrifice because it's the biggest possession highest position you could ever hold, so you can be given in sacrifice. Because if you are going to give something away to the gods, then a life would be the one. It's the gem. It's the most precious stone of them all. Um,
Mm.
but then deep down among the old humans, life is sacred. It's the animation of the body, of the static, and therefore there's something wonderful about it. So we kind of want to protect it at any cost, but at the same time, we're happy to shed each other's blood at a quarrel about a loaf of bread. So were there any holy texts, whether official or not, that reference abortion as sort of a denomination, something to be punished about, or something that the gods would frown upon?
Well, as far as I know, in the Bible, which I'm pretty familiar with, there is no mention at all of abortion, which is kind of surprising because it's not like it hadn't been discovered yet or invented yet or whatever. But it doesn't come up. I think it's ironic when one occasionally hears of uh, Bible burnings because they're saying those pro life or anti-abortion people, them and their darn Bible that's telling them to oppose abortion. The Bible doesn't say that. It doesn't even mention it. There are two passages that are sometimes deemed relevant, but I don't think they are. One is in Numbers 5, when a husband begins to suspect that his wife is carrying on with somebody else. And they have the ritual or the ordeal, really, of the bitter water. And it gives you a little recipe for how to prepare this. You put some material from one of the grain offerings in the water and so on. And it makes it very unpalatable. And it's not absolutely clear what happens. It probably was to the original readers, but the words are now difficult for us to define in context. But it says something about the uterus falling. Now, this seems at least to mean that this would happen if you were an adulteress. I mean, of course, this is like the Monty Python movie, if she floats, she's a witch. But nonetheless, was this abortifacient? Some people think it is, and so you were trying to abort the fetus begotten by the adulterer, but we don't really know what it means. It could mean that, but really an ambiguous passage is just as good as no passage. We don't know what it's saying. The other one, I forget where it is, but there are various, I think they'd be called tort laws, like the most drastic one is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and so on. Well, one of them says that if a woman tries to intervene in a fight between her husband and some other guy, and
Mm.
she accidentally takes a punch and miscarries, the guy that hit her will pay a certain amount in fines. And some say, well, there you go. You see, an unborn fetus is not of the same value in their eyes as a child would be. Well, that's not cogent, because the point is the guy didn't mean to inflict this
Yeah.
harm. She got in the way. So it's a matter of, is it from malice toward her? Would you call it manslaughter or something?
Yeah.
So that one doesn't seem to be in there either. And I don't know of any other passage in the Old or the New Testaments that deal with that. Now, there are a couple of very early Christian books that some apparently had thought should be in the Bible at some point, but for whatever reason, and I'm certainly not invoking divine providence, they didn't wind up making the cut. One of them is the Apocalypse of Peter, which was widely read. And in it, Peter asks Jesus for some idea of what the sinners have awaiting them in hell. And he tells them, and it's an early counterpart to Dante's Inferno. In fact, there were many of these old apocalyptic visions of hell. The Apocalypse of Paul had a very detailed one. We only have a fragment of the Apocalypse of Peter, but it does dole out particular let the punishment fit the crime sentences, and it says that I believe women who have aborted their fetuses will be hung up by hooks in their nipples forever, some kind of horrific thing. And I'm thinking there's another one. I'm thinking it's the Epistle of Barnabas, but I didn't think to check. But it just condemns, I believe, abortionists or people that get abortions in a list of people that ain't going to make it into the kingdom of God. That certainly implies that there was a decent early Christian condemnation of it, as does the fact that in the next couple of centuries, one of the things about Christianity that helped it succeed was that they didn't expose their infants, which was quite common all over the ancient world. Another mouth to feed, nope, out to the curb. But also they were against abortion, which was done often for the same reason. Look, I got enough daughters, like Pride and Prejudice. So Christians didn't do this. And as a result, they did have more daughters to marry off. And most of the eligible guys early on were pagans. So they engaged in missionary dating, not in the way we might think of it, right? Where you would nag your husband into converting. And apparently that worked quite a lot. And so that's one way the church grew. So that is attestation that many early Christians were against it. But, let me stress that I do not regard the Bible as some sort of binding authority. So I am not invoking authority.
No, fair enough. Yeah. No, I'm just mentioning it to sort of into what is sort of when I say the Bible, we're not talking God, we're talking what ancient people thought about that, because they've written the text themselves. But I'm going to make a comment, and I'm going to probe the situation from a slightly different angle with you. So I think that the logical thing to say, although there is no direct condemnation from the holy texts directly, pointing out at this, but the sacredness of life itself, as emphasized in different areas of the Bible, will then sort of stretch itself to the life of an unborn child. Would that be sort of reasonable?
Well, that would be my inference, but I'm careful. Like, that's what the rabbis were so good at. There were plenty of issues never raised in the Bible. They didn't pretend they were. So they said, can we isolate a principle that would be applicable to these cases to which it does not speak? And I think that's what most conservative Christians are doing when they say abortion is murder. Yes, it forbids murder. It doesn't forbid abortion, but it seems to me it's the intentional taking of innocent life. So it falls under you shall do no murder. That's an inference. The sacredness of life would be too. But then I think of something that, pro-abortion advocates say against Catholics. They often say, you claim life is sacred when it comes to abortion, yet you're fine with capital punishment. Well, I can't believe anybody says that, though I know they do, because there's a relevant difference between innocent life.
Yeah. I can see that. So how about
debatable?
Yeah. Now let's see it from sort of a pragmatic angle, which is miscarriages do happen, and this is accidental. So we're talking about two people in a loving relationship. They want to have a baby, and miscarriages happen today. But imagine back in the day when there were no medical care, things were a bit difficult. People were probably a bit poorer. Miscarriages would happen quite often. The percentage would be quite higher, especially when we talk about early marriages as well. Women were married a lot earlier, so these things would have happened. And then we're talking about the accidental act of losing your baby. And then let's compare it with the deliberate one. So I would gather the deliberate one would be usually somebody who is mostly trying to hide some shame. I don't think it would have been on the back of a disagreement about the style of life like what we have today, because back in the day, I don't think you've had too many choices. So I'm thinking this would be more about, oh, I am going to have a child, and that child does not have a father or a husband. I'm not married. I'm not supposed to be having sex, and therefore I want to hide my shame. Namely the situation with Jesus Christ. Until it was got justified with a sort of a divine story. But the initial situation would be, oh, how can you have a child? You're not married, sort of thing. So, what would the ancient world perceive a woman who would have had a child out of wedlock? Do we have incidents where women were sort of raising children that way? And how are they conceived by the society then?
Boy, let me think of an example. There must be something in the Old Testament about this. Because usually it's about the rights of the firstborn versus secondborn and so on. Is there one?
I mean, while it comes to your mind, I'm sure will pop in sort of suddenly. Usually things come up when you're not thinking about them. But the situation with Mary and Jesus, right? Mary tried to explain things away, right? I mean, there would have been a fear at some point that people will think Jesus is sort of the harvest of an adulterer, so. Obviously, there was a perception then at that time. The culture would have not agreed with that, or would they?
Well, they would frown on it. In fact, we're not told what Mary ever said about it, except initially in what I think is an interpolation. She says, "How can this be? I know not a man."
Yeah.
I think that somebody is trying to beef up the miraculous conception story when it wasn't there originally. In fact, that makes nonsense of the whole thing. I always picture Gabriel saying, wait a minute, have I got the wrong address? I mean, you're engaged, aren't you? Surely you're going to have. So it's the only one of the canticles in the beginning of Luke where there is an interruption and so forth and so on. So we don't know what she thought about it. But in Matthew, she is found to be pregnant. And as an aside to the reader, Matthew says, well, from the Holy Spirit. But Joseph certainly didn't get that news yet. He says, oh boy, there's been some kind of funny business here. And we don't really know whether he thought she was an adulteress or had been raped. But current law would suggest that she has to be divorced at least, and possibly stoned, though they seem to have been getting away from that. Like eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. They didn't enforce that anymore. They just let you pay a fine. So I'm not sure, but he decided to, it says the break he gave her was he was going to break the engagement quietly so she wouldn't be a public scandal. But then God tells him, look, no problem. It's from me. She's not been with any other man. But the idea was she would have brought shame on herself otherwise. Now, in Mark, when Jesus goes to his hometown synagogue, he speaks from the scroll, and he says great stuff about it. That's what ancient synagogue sermons were. There were commentaries on the readings, and they say, isn't this the son of Mary? Aren't his brothers and his sisters here? Where does he get such wisdom? How can he do these mighty feats? Well, because Mark has grafted on a different contradictory scene where they get mad at Jesus. Luke goes so far as to have the mob try to kill him. Like, what happened? The thing starts as a story of local boy makes good. But in light of the incongruous continuation, people have said, oh, when they say, is this not the son of Mary? Why not say, why is this not the son of Joseph? Oh, well, it must be because they knew he wasn't the son of Joseph. And that what they're saying by, is this not the son of Mary, is, you bastard! That strikes me as utterly ludicrous, a blind reading of the text. It's more like it's assumed Joseph is dead by then. But at any rate, I mean, the Quran calls him Jesus, son of Mary. What if they think it was a bastard? So I don't know where else it even comes up. I could be wrong. And
what about a slightly different angle? Orphans, so orphans could be the product of the parents sort of dying in a war or in an illness, or a father sort of dies and the mother is no longer able to afford to look after the child, so might be given away. But the outlook of an orphan back in the ancient day, when we look at Romulus, for example, sometimes the adopted son is more revered than the biological son.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And some of these orphans, do you have any record in history where orphans are known to be the fruit of an illegal relationship, and they sort of went on and thrived?
Well, actually, there probably are, but that's just a guess. Actually, I'm lamentably ignorant on that too.
Yeah.
I have to think that must have happened, but I don't know.
But then we don't have incidents where these kids, because they must have happened, they must have been there, but they were not particularly pointed at as, you shouldn't be here type of thing. They probably would have taken different positions. They were given a chance in life, and it looks like people were not at least bothered by them.
The fact that they were orphaned or
orphans as a result of maybe an adultery relationship.
I just don't know. Oddly enough, I don't think I've ever read anything about that.
Yeah. Well, from my reading, I couldn't find any shaming or deliberate shaming of that sort. The shaming might have been about something else, but then it's not really about them being the orphans or the fruit of a legal relationship between a couple. So I've never seen anything like that. So from my analysis, from what I've been looking so far, abortion could have been attempted in the ancient world, for one reason or another, and people were not kind of bothered by it. It just was happening. There's a lot of miscarriages as well because of poor medical. So I don't think people would have known the difference too much. Maybe only the mother would have known, because the mother could have done it with the help of a couple of other girls and could have always claimed, "Oh, I've had a miscarriage."
That's right.
Or it's never happened. If it's a 14 years old girl who's not married and wants to hide this away. So we would never know. But then let's then tackle the actual conversation here. We looked at the different variables: father, mother, what the sort of the society would deem it to be. But let's jump into today's society and talk about abortion. So would you then agree? So as a general rule, you think life is worth saving, which is I agree with. I think a couple who are trying to have a relationship, it doesn't matter if they're married or not, could be de facto. They want to have a relationship, and whether it's deliberate or accidental pregnancy, most couples would be excited and happy, and they want to have that child. But on occasions, and let's talk about couples first, because the other situations might have different triggers then. So maybe 19, 20 years old young couples are together, and the lady gets pregnant. She's in love with her man, no problems whatsoever. And she goes, "Oh, it's way too early. We need to travel and we need to do bits and pieces. And, I'm not ready to be a mother yet." And the dude, who's also 20, concurs with her. It's like, "Oh, I agree. I think it's way too early." They've just done the exam, and you can see the two strips, and it's only a week old. And they said, "Well, so we can have a lot more experience in life. We can have better chance at raising that child properly. We don't have that much money. We don't have that many resources. We're gonna struggle if we are going to have that child." And within a week or two from the pregnancy, we're talking like, now we're going to get to the scientific bit where there is no heartbeat, there's no central nervous system, there is no pain at all. The only pain would be for the parents, because even though parents would do that sort of thing, it haunts them for a while. It's not a nice and cool feeling. Nobody likes it. Naturally, you're going against your instinct of being a father or a mother, so it's not cool, but they do it anyway, and they agree on it. What do you think, Robert? Here, what do you think in that incident? What happened here? What are the dynamics?
There's no excuse there. They Perhaps it happened despite precautions they took, but life throws various things at you, and you have to deal with them in a moral way. And it seems to me that preventing that developing baby's life is not your option. You really have no right. It ultimately comes down to saying that it would be convenient for me to prevent this birth, and I think that is really out of the question morally. You better just deal with it, or you're going to have something much worse than a monetary debt to carry, unless you have desensitized yourself through an argument that it's okay. But I personally cannot see that it's okay.
So Rick's Profanus, and thank you so much for the super chat, but he agrees with you, but on different grounds. You see, Robert, you're an atheist, right? So your predication and you're anchoring your position based on a slightly different angle. Rex is obviously a religious person, and he's talking about the giver of life, and he can't take it away. Only the giver of life can take it away, and therefore you have no right to do so. But I would like you to comment on this, but also tell me why you're thinking that, what you just told me now, without having to appeal to the giver of life situation.
Well, this, I think, if you extended the principle and you said, boy, I could advance in my job if I didn't have these damn kids soaking up all my money. Kids, let's get in the car and close up the garage and wait for daddy. And then afterwards, I don't know what happened. Like, nobody would do that except a real lunatic. But I believe that would be the same principle. You have no right to make another person one who is going to be a person just like you, unless you put a stop to it. You have no right to do that, no matter what disadvantage it costs you. Like people with Down syndrome children. Surprisingly, just about every family I have seen, and I know a few that have Down syndrome, they say it's a joy having this kid. I wouldn't have aborted him. Well, that's a nice surprise, but I understand how somebody would consider it, because they're going to say, boy, I didn't sign up for this. Well, it's your decision, not mine, but I'm afraid that would not be justified either. If you had something that was just a living, like there are, anencephalic kids. My mother-in-law, who was a nurse, was a caretaker for one. This kid had no brain. I was about to say mind, but really no brain, and never would. I don't know that I think that would have been an obligation. I think a case like that, this should have been a miscarriage. And if you want to call that an abortion, then I'd say that's one of the allowable exceptions, because you're not preventing a sentient life form there.
Yeah. So this is the argument here now. Um, One of the arguments been made. You're not really taking any life away, because the science would tell us in the first couple of weeks there isn't a life to speak of. We're not talking. There's no brain. There's no heart. There's no consciousness. There's no central nervous system. It's a bit of blood and the precursor of a future life. Yes, I agree. Few months later, things would be a lot more complex. But we're talking about the very first initial part, where there isn't anything to suffer.
Still, you're preventing someone's life, it seems to me, because that thing is not going to turn into a basketball or a CD player or a dog. It has a genetic code ticking away, what Aristotle called an entelechy, an inborn drive that will become a human being unless it is interfered with. I don't think you have the right to do that. And that kind of is similar to the objection or the argument that, well, this kid, if he's born into this awful ghetto and a war zone and all that, let's save him the trouble. It seems to me you're saying, let's decide for him and kill him now. You don't have, I mean, the odds are bad, but that's not for you to decide, it seems to me.
Wouldn't every attempt then at contraception would be kind of similar? Like I'm an antinatalist, so my wife and I vowed not to have children. We don't want to have children. We look after animals. These are our children. We had 7 cats and a few dogs. We look after shelter animals, and but we kind of, the reason why, it's a philosophical stance of, we don't want to bring more consciousness to suffer. So we kind of looked at our situations, and we know life is life is beautiful when you're in the right moment and the right thing, and you've got a cold beer in your hand and things are nice. But in general, there are lots of ups and downs. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, especially if they're smarter than average, if they're given the chance to decide whether they wanted to be to come to life, which is going to be a dilemma, because you need to have your consciousness active with some experiences and memory to decide whether you should be alive or not. But
you mean people considering suicide?
No, not suicide, but if they were to be given the chance before they were born, whether they wanted to exist or not. Because we're thrown into life. We're not given a chance to decide whether we want to be alive or not. We're just here. So
isn't that a contrary to fact condition?
Well, it is in a way, because it is what it is. We're kind of here right now. But I'm talking about upon reflection, whether if you were hypothetically, of course, because it will never happen, if you were given the chance to decide whether you exist or not, and being shown the book of your life kind of thing. Few people would choose to say, like, I don't want to exist. So an antinatalist will sort of contemplate the same thing, but start the process from a very, very early. So not having kids to start with. Wouldn't that be kind of in the same area, because we're stopping life from happening?
I think not. You can't make the decision for the person on the chance that they might be sorry, like Job, that they were born. I wish my birthday had be kicked out of the calendar. He says, but the fetus, as you say, cannot contemplate such things. And if you say, well, I bet he's going to have a rough time, let's save him the trouble. You have no right to do that. It seems to me that is really monstrous. But deciding not to have children is nothing like that. There's not a bun in the oven yet. the fetus is not going through its metamorphosis. So there's nothing wrong with that. And I think contraception, preventing conception, I disagree with my Catholic friends on that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that either.
So you're thinking once life starts, it's kind of unethical to stop it from continuing?
Yeah.
Okay. And is it predicated on the sacredness of life? You think life is sacred. It's something so special in our existence that biological consciousness that it's worth preserving?
Well, human individuals are. That's the well, to a lesser degree. Animal. We must treat animals uh, without cruelty. But this gets into vegetarianism, which I'd like to discuss another time too.
Next.
But with but what is sacred to me is the individual person, and you've got one in the works. You're preventing what they're going to become if you abort. And It's like this is not an eternal state, that you're never going to have anything but a fetus, as if you're talking about a goldfish swimming around in there. And it seems to me you just don't have the right. Now, by sacred, I mean the most valuable. And I would say that Richard Dawkins might say, I mean, I don't know what he does say about the issue, but surely it's genetically preferable to have people that want to stay alive and reproduce, because the ones who don't aren't going to have kids, and they're being weeded out, unfortunately. And for the sake of the human race, it's better to go ahead and propagate, but that does not depend on any individual. So
Yeah.
I don't think someone's decision not to have a child is shirking their duty. I
Yeah.
wouldn't say that.
But that's why I like the term pro-choice, because pro-choice here doesn't mean necessarily aborting the fetus. It actually also includes keeping the fetus.
Well, that's just really a verbal trick.
Yeah, but if it's your choice so far, because we're talking about choices here, and we're gonna get to the more difficult scenarios. We tackled a very easy one, just like, oh, I don't feel like having a baby. That's kind of easy out. But here's another scenario. This has happened a couple of weeks ago. One of my colleagues at work was going to have a second baby. He was over the moon. Older a dude, an older lady, and they were over the moon. They were so happy, to throw a party and everything. And then suddenly they got the news that the child, if they continue, it will be Down syndrome, but also will have some physical deformations. They're Catholic, and they're, even though they live in Australia, but they're not originally from Australia, and there were pressures from the family overseas, and eventually they made the choice to abort, because it would have been a life of agony for the child as well as for the parents. So they made the choice, and medically it was recommended to them as well. What do you think?
Well, that's one of those things where I am not the one to make the judgment, obviously, so I can't come up with a general rule that one might apply. Like Kant says, imagine that what you intend to do would become a universal maxim. That's not applicable here. Again, I know people that would consider it their duty to go ahead, but I kind of feel like to go ahead and have the child. But I kind of feel like this is one that slipped through the net, that should have miscarried, and you're just sort of doing what nature should have done. Now, I don't know that I could prove this is the right thing to do, but again, I don't think that exception should be made into the rule, that any perceived disadvantage or likely disadvantage for the child would give us the right to get rid of it.
Yeah.
You'd really have to look at the cases as you're
Yeah.
doing.
I think the rule in general is most people want to have children, they keep the child. I think it's going to be always be the rule. We're talking about the exceptions here. Aborting is not an easy decision, and it's very traumatizing for parents. Um, so it's not an easy decision to come up with. But you would understand that position. So even though you might not quite be sure about it, but you would completely understand the parent's position, not to want to have a child who's mentally and physically suffering. And these kind of children as well, they will change the life of the people around them forever as well. It's just going to change things. So you're understanding to this. You kind of understand
Yeah.
where they're coming. Okay.
Mhm.
So you know what? I think this is a very reasonable conversation we're having.
Oh, yeah.
I'm with you. I think if life is special, yeah, okay, I grant you that, because we're here and discussing these topics because we're alive, and we couldn't do it without being alive. So yes, it is special. This very moment is made possible through that current that's running through our veins and our brain. So it is that spark. People call it divine. People call it nature. I don't know what the hell it is, but it's damn special while it's happening, right? I grant you that. And there's a balance, 150 years ago, we're only 1 billion, 1.5 billion years ago. We're 8 billions now. And Egypt, where my father is from, in the last 60 days, they had 280,000 babies.
Mm.
So this is 120 million or 110 million people country. The capital Cairo's got 35 million or so. Things are difficult. Resources are scarce, and people. So we could be looking at a society where, imagine that 8 billion becomes 16, and that kind of exponential growth can happen, in 50 years or so. And with the kind of the world we're living in, wouldn't be a bit of a worrisome situation?
Yeah, I think though the big problem is in somebody else's lap there. In like, does the ruler, for instance, in Ethiopia a few years ago, terrible starvation, a lot of money and food was sent to them, and the rulers just kept it all. That seems to happen again and again. So the starvation is something they have to deal with because they won't really let anybody. In fact, there was a Superman story about that, where Superman goes to the country with a huge amount of food, but he faces a phalanx of armed people, that soldiers that can't hurt him, but he doesn't want to violate the law and create chaos. So he's screwed. He can't do it. That's kind of the actual situation. And so the blame falls on the people who, through poor planning or confiscating the food, or creating wartime conditions where harvests are destroyed, they're the ones that take that one too.
Yeah.
If the baby starved to death, God forbid, it's their fault. So I don't really even see that as this kind of a decision or this kind of a dilemma. It's a horrific one, but it's like a Sophie's Choice kind of a thing. You're in no man's land there.
Great movie with Meryl Streep, I think.
Let me just say something else about that. I don't believe there is a God who gave laws, but I think Aquinas was very wise when he said, you want to know why we're obliged to keep the commandments of God? Well, we owe it to him. He's our creator. But does that mean the commands he gave us are arbitrary, just to God's will? If he said tomorrow, well, what the heck, let's have some change around here. Thou shalt commit adultery. Thou shalt murder. Could that happen? Aquinas said, well, no, of course not. Because these things are inherently right and wrong because of the kind of creatures God made. For instance, when we say we're social animals and so forth. Well, do you ever wonder why there are no societies, no matter what totem or fetish or pantheon they worship, where murder is okay. It's open season on theft and rape and child murder. No, nobody has that, and it's because they all have the brains to see, to have an optimal, even livable social existence, you have to have a kind of social contract.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Even though it's not from, we know it's not from God, but
yeah, it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be. Yeah,
Aquinas was shrewd enough to realize, well, God created the world in a certain way, so these laws are the things to obey to make it work. Okay, you can just eliminate God, and you got the social contract. There's no problem there, and let's see here. Forget the heck. What was the me and my big mouth? I've lost track of it.
So we're talking about Aquinas and the laws coming from man or God, and it doesn't matter because it's still an observation of the social conditions of humanity, and therefore still valid.
Yeah, and it's for these reasons we have these law codes, and why you're responsible to society as well as other individuals to keep them. Now you might say, well, I don't care about that. Well, I'm afraid we can't afford to have you not care about that. If you want to be a serial killer because you think that would be fun, I'm afraid we can't let you do that. And we'll do what we have to stop that. But in most situations, it's to foster an optimized life. It doesn't have anything to do with any, like, what's his name? Dennis Prager, who I have a lot of respect for. I agree with him on many things, but he says, if you're some kind of secular humanist, you have no basis for morality. The only way to have objective morals is if there is some kind of heavenly bureau of weights and standards that say things are right or wrong, a Platonic realm. No, if that's just the divine command ethic. If God said, okay, thou shalt murder, it would be right to do it. No, you have to get rid of that, or at least modify it like Aquinas did. And okay, here we go. This is what I was originally getting to. Now, how do we form these moralities? I guess every society does it one by one, did in the ancient times. I think what we're doing is to impose a moral code on the chaos of life. And I use the analogy of settlers coming to some new continent, and to clear living space, they got to cut down a bunch of trees and then quarry a bunch of stones to make shelters and so forth. They have to tame the land. Well, that's kind of what we face. We live in a world that is not that does not have inherent laws of right or wrong. We must shape that world into a livable place or livable system. And the chaos we have to tame is that within us that will make it into the war of all against all. So is morality a given in the universe? No, but it's a given in human nature, and we terraform the world to make it a fit place to live. So that's my moral theory in a nutshell.
No, I'm in agreement with you here. Thank you so much, Robert, for the super chat. You're now a moderator, Robert. He comes quite a lot to my show, so thank you so much. He's a good friend now. Rex has actually made a clarification, and now we know, was tongue in cheek. He was just joking. Looks like he's a fellow heathen. Pretended to be a religious for a second, but it was he just donated just for price, he said. So thank you. But this conversation is quite interesting because I find myself in agreement with a lot of things you're saying. So because you also kind of understood the situation of maybe a Down syndrome future kid with a lot of physical issues, and the parents are making the most difficult decision in their life. I remember, this is the guy was in tears in the office every day. So, and and he was a very kind of um, a man's man kind of guy. There's a sort of guy who would, smash 10 beers in a session and start, watching a football game. And he was in tears every single night, every single day in the office. So I'm sure the wife would. So these are difficult decisions. So I think the rule is people want to look forward to life. Loving couples or adopting couples, or what have you, they want to start a life, and that life means that they want to have their genetic code imprinted. It's such a strong thing. It's not just ethical, or this is biologically imprinted on us. We want
Right.
to see our spitting images running around the house, and it's a wonderful thing to see. But every now and then, so that's the exception here, not the rule. So if people are going to try to make abortion the rule, I'll be the first one to oppose. I think the rule is you want to have a coherent society and a happy life and a happy family, happy partnerships, and every now and then things can go wrong. We talked about physical. What about a situation of rape? So a female who was raped. And she's 18, and the rapist, was violent. She was in hospital for 2 weeks. Trauma. What would you do? What would you think is the right thing to do?
Well, I think the best thing from a moral standpoint would be to keep the child and either put it up for abortion or say, I'm not going to commit the genetic fallacy in an incredibly literal sense by saying the kid is to blame for how he got here. He's not. So you're going to punish him. I wouldn't mind seeing the rapist killed. In fact, I'd be in favor of that. But the not the child. Now, however, it is not mine to put somebody through hell emotionally. So I think, and the same would go for a case where the mother's life is in grave danger if she has the baby. Again, just as I would gladly lay down my life for my children, I think that would be the thing one ultimately ought to do, but it's not for me to decide.
Yeah,
I think, like the rabbi said, there's a difference between the good person and the perfect person. And the good is good enough, but it's possible to go for the perfect will of God. So
yeah,
I think it would be best to just say, keep reminding yourself it's not the baby's fault, unless, of course, you can tell the baby is going to be a monster. Like the rapist, and in some cases you could probably tell genetically, but
uh,
that's what I would say. There's certain
usually the
things that are
mothers.
moral but can't be legalized. I mean,
Yeah, usually
legislated.
Usually the mother doesn't do it for as a punishment for the child, but really she does not want to have a daily reminder of that
Oh,
incident.
I understand, but
Yeah.
won't the result be that this
Oh,
kid? It's like
yeah,
Muhammad in the earliest surah of the Quran, supposedly says, on the day, this, I'll never forget this, on the day of judgment, when the trumpet blows and the dead are raised, the infant girl would say, what was my crime that I was killed? And of course, he's thinking of exposing infants. That sends a shudder through me. And I have to think that if of course the kid would never realize what had happened, but I think he's got a shot at life, and it would be the less desirable thing to take it from him. But the anguish of the victim, the woman, is so great that it may overrule that. I don't know, not my call to make.
yeah. It's not an easy one. It's because yeah, and we have situations where women have opted to given their future child for adoption. And the moment they see the baby, they refuse to give it for
Yeah.
adoption.
Yeah.
So we do have these incidents. We do have incidents where people contemplate a certain idea, and then they go against it, and then they just say that the best thing I've ever done is to keep the baby. We have situations where the father walks away out of a loving relationship, and woman is pregnant, and they want to have the baby. Madonna had a very famous song, I think in the 80s or in the 90s, Papa Don't Breach. I think it's was a song about a teenage kid with a baby. That song, I'm in trouble deep. I want to keep my
I've heard it,
baby.
but I never understood all the lyrics.
So that was a song about that, and it was obviously back in the 80s and the 90s. It was a big thing. It was a lot of young relationships happening. This is on the back of the 60s and the 70s of sexual liberation, and the smoking of the weed, and the boys and the girls mingling freely, and you end up with irresponsible relationships like that. The father, who's actually a kid himself, probably a 17 years old kid who's wiping his booger and not sure what to do with life, gets scared away and runs away. And the wife or the mother or the female partner decides to keep the baby, then she's a baby herself, and it becomes a burden for society. I think back in the day, people probably had to mature a lot quicker because the life expectancy was short. If you only live for 45 years, you want to start life earlier. You can't marry at the age of 35 when you're only got like 10 years to go or something, So it's a different dynamic.
Do you think that is actually the average lifespan? I don't know this. Statistics make my mind shut down. But I wonder if they get this idea of people dying at 45 by erroneously failing to realize that this counts in the high infant death rate. You think, because for instance, in Psalm 90, I quote it not because it's the Bible, because it's an ancient text, it says that we live 60, or if by reason of strength 80. In other words, it wasn't particularly odd to find 80-year-olds.
It's true.
True. So I've always wondered if somebody is not unwittingly juggling the numbers. I don't know.
My understanding is they take the infancy death sort of out of the equation. You still get the 80 and 90 years old for sure, but we're talking about as well. There's if you're sick, you kind of die. They put some leeches on you, and right. and so I think this is a rough average. I think,
yeah, right. That makes sense.
Yeah, Ramses II died at the age of 90. And this is the guy who's supposed to be the Pharaoh of Moses. He's in the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir Square in Cairo, and he looks a bit greenish, and Muslims will point out and say, look, he's green because he drowned. He was inside the water for quite some time. That's why he turned green. And obviously the guy he's 90 and died out of bone problems and a tooth abscess, as per all the examinations. So you get that sort of thing, but we're talking about rough averages. We're talking about wars. We're talking about the likelihood to die out of accident. There's a lot of combination of different factors, but then people might conflate that piece of information and think every single man used to die at the age of 45, which is incorrect. That is incorrect. Yeah. Thank you, Constellation Pegasus. What do you think about life starts at conception? Do you think life starts at conception, or there's a certain?
It's certainly living, and that mitosis is going on, and all of the stuff inherent to a human being is in the works, and you don't produce the human like Dr. Frankenstein did mechanically. It's already germinating under its own steam. And to me, that means, human life has begun.
Yeah. So maybe we need to start rethinking these things and think deeply. If life is important, it's special. I don't, maybe the word sacred is probably, we need to get it out of our dictionary. It's special. It's something special. It's the reason why we're having this conversation and we can
Yeah.
actually discuss this sort of thing. So once it starts, and because we could not stop it for ourselves, we have no right to stop it for others. We don't know what the contribute, and that's the thing. You don't know who, I mean, this could be the next Hitler, or this could be the next Isaac Newton. You just don't know.
Right.
And maybe that's what makes life interesting. But on certain occasions, uh, where, and I think this is now here, we're going to talk about who is to make the decision. Let's say where you've agreed that, okay, choice can be made here based on very strict criteria. It's not the rule. It's strictly the exception, where certain situations might be medical complications or horrible situations outside of the ordinary are deemed to be by, now here's the question, only by the mother. Now some of the feminists would argue, my body, my rule. The man has no say whatsoever. What do you think?
I think that's absurd, simply given the fact that the fetus has its own genetic code. If it were simply an appendix of some kind, it wouldn't. So I think that is just blown out of the water. In fact, I suspect, I'm no mind reader, but that seems so ridiculous an argument to me that I wonder if people are rationalizing to avoid the horrific realization of what they're doing. I think it may be a product of cognitive dissonance reduction. They cannot afford to realize, to admit to themselves what they're really doing. That's my guess, right? I'm not a mind reader.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be quite reasonable that there's a contribution. If we're talking about partnerships, and we're talking about a loving relationship here, is a partnership going. I think it's only fair that both contributors are equally in the decision making dynamics, unless the father, for some reason, you know, buzzes off, or he's gone somewhere else. He's fled, ran away, whatever. Then yeah, that's the only reasonable thing to make, because only the ladies around to make that particular decision. But for a male to be completely outcast and say, no, 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 hold on, I'm the one who's going to be carrying this for 9 months. I'm the one who's to make the decision. I think it's a bit unfair. I'm kind of in agreement with this.
Hmm. Yeah, the
Um,
guy's given up his proxy vote to his wife if he just scrams.
Yeah. Do you think this is as a reaction to some of the females? Obviously, we've discussed in a previous conversation sexism, and we know that masculinity at some point was quite prevalent. And do you think this is sometimes maybe a bit of overreacting as a payback from the female community, saying, "Well, you used to bloody call the shots all the time. Now it's my turn."
That, in my view, is just the pendulum going to the opposite extreme, which is not where you want it.
Yeah.
That's what I think, anyway.
Yeah, you think somewhere in between. The reasonable thing to do is, if it's a partnership, if it's a true partnership, this is the couple always talking and consulting with each other to come up with, especially when it comes to a decision like this, is a big decision, because the
Yeah,
child is born, he's got somebody to call a father.
yeah, yeah. You were wise, Van Helsing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Now, we kind of in agreement with all the things we ran through. Do you have another 10, 15 minutes to take some questions?
Sure, of course.
Yeah. All right, folks. So if you want to prepare your questions now, I know we've taken a couple through Super Chat as they came along, but they were quite bang on. So I like to thank people being very, very in tune with the conversation. So all the questions that came through so far were relevant, and spot on during conversation. So you can shoot away your questions, and although super chats are appreciated, but you don't have to. We can still take all earnest questions. So, what do you think we should do in the future? What is the reasonable and just thing to do when it comes to the matter of abortion, life, pro-choice? What is the reasonable stance?
Well, I think the issues would have to be pretty drastically changed by some sort of uh, technological revolution, like if cloning somebody, that this entity would be born as a baby, and some of the questions would arise, and there you obviously wouldn't have to have somebody else's agreement. That would be one. um, let's see, something similar would come up if you could manipulate the genome to get rid of illnesses that with which the infant would be born. That wouldn't be ending or preventing its life, but you would be tampering with it in a way you never could before. Would you have the right to do that? Who would? That's a tricky one. I mean, that means something to me because one of my daughters was born with my affliction of Milroy's disease. Well, if there was some way to have checked, does she have it? Oh, yes, she does, but we can fix it before she shows up. Oh boy, great. But so there are a lot of other questions, but actually, I think genetic advances like that would make a lot of these decisions moot. That you might be able to fix enough stuff already in the womb that you wouldn't have to face the decision.
Fair comment, yeah, fair, and most parents would be taking that option. Imagine you're a proud parent, and you're going to be faced with a couple of challenges, and that can be fixed genetically before the situation happens. But some people have very interesting minds. They go, no, I don't want to change nature. I want to see, because that shortcoming that my child was going to be born with might be the very reason why they're going to become so special.
Yes, that's right. That could be.
You
Yeah.
know, life is crazy that way. Life is not, and we've seen it. We've seen. I mean, would Stephen Hawking have had the same journey if he never had that incident where he completely lost mobility and muscle, and suddenly became Stephen Hawking? Would he be the same person? I don't know. Maybe you remember he was. If you watch the movie A Theory of Everything, he used to love parties and go out and chatting to the girls. And would he have been so focused and determined to pursue science? I don't know. You wonder.
Well, this may be superstition or rationalization, but throughout many years, I have wondered if the handicap I have because of Milroy's disease, difficulties with the weight distribution on the feet, and lymphedema and all that, I've wondered, is that somehow compensated for by the abilities I have that do not require physical prowess that I will never have because of nature? If so, I don't mind the trade-off.
Yeah, yeah. I want to say. I think the other term is not pro-abortion. I think pro-abortion makes it you're kind of a pro-death kind of. But I think choice would probably make more sense, and that includes the choice of keeping the baby. Constellation Pegasus, thank you again for the super chat, and he's commenting about, he was having a conversation about abortions, and he mentioned that life begins at conception, and he was laughed at by a tough crowd, so I mean, scientifically it doesn't, but because and here the definition, the devil is in the details. What do you mean by life? Most people, when they talk about life here, they talk about in the context of suffering, pain, consciousness. So therefore, it's a lot easier to get rid of a biological organism that is still merging, trying to become consciousness and aware of its surrounding. However, I still understand that the definition of life that starts with the soup of life simmering away.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand it. I do understand it, actually. This is going to be always a very difficult conversation, because I think we're going to end up, we've talked about it, Bob, before. We said you almost need to understand the details of a certain incident to make a proper judgment. It's very difficult to make a judgment on saying, are you pro or against this, just like that, without, tell me more, tell me about the dad and the mother, tell me what's happened. I would like to know the circumstances. I would like to know the medical condition. You want to know a lot more details before you can chip in with some advice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just looking for any more questions for you guys. Do pro-lifers care about the mother's life too? You would think so. I mean, as a pro-lifer, do you care for the life of the mother? So I think you might be wanting to ask. Yeah.
That goes back at least to the question of, is abortion moral or permitted or legitimate if the mother's life is put in danger? And I usually hear pro-lifers say, well, yeah, of course, that's an exception. But I don't know. I mean, it would be interesting to have a survey on that. There probably have been. I've never seen them, though.
Yeah.
And the way I think of it is that, as I've said, that the noblest thing would be to take the risk, but that's not for me to decide. If giving my life would save my children, well, that is for me to decide, and I would gladly give it up. But I'm just me. I would not presume to tell somebody else what to do there.
Yeah. So let's hypothetically talk about this. A mother wants to have, very excited about having a baby. No problems whatsoever. There's a loving husband in the background. It's all good. Doctor examines the situation. Said, look, you're going to have to abort this baby because this could be your death. There's certain complications. And unless you get rid of and we're talking maybe in the first few weeks, right? Unless you do that, your life is at a 90% risk. What would be the right stance to do? Because I'll be more inclined to get rid of that, because the mother will have the ability to try again, and obviously there's a loving relationship with the husband. She is maybe the daughter of someone, so there's already a complexity of relationship around this consciousness being the mother. While that future baby, although it's still a horrible situation, has less strings attached, and therefore we're talking about here a dilemma where both situations are horrible, but you're taking the one with the lesser effect on society and relationships around you. What do you think about that angle?
Well, I don't see, I mean, I kind of take that for granted in my analysis of it, and it is so difficult a thing. That's why I say I would not presume to decide for anybody else or to make that a law that you have to. But I think that it is comparable to being willing to give your life for your children should it come to that. And I think many parents like me would say, if it comes to that, pull the trigger on me. I wouldn't have any hesitation. It's their turn, not mine. That doesn't make me especially noble. I realize that you can explain that by sociobiology, right?
Yeah.
But that is my instinct as a parent, and so I think that is the nobler way to go. But it's not the kind of thing I can require of another person.
One of the things I noticed about you, Bob, is your ideas are yours and yours alone. You try not to say, "Well, I think like that." And I remember you saying clearly once, "I don't know why people care so much for what I think. I think what I think. They can go ahead and be free of what they think, and you don't try to sort of impose your ideas on others." But you come to your ideas through reflection, deep thought, and you come up with conclusions that can be changed in the future based on you being persuaded by better evidence.
Which has happened.
Yeah. So the problem is with people who get enraged because other people think differently. Do you think might be the issue here?
Well, yeah, I think so. They may consider it potentially a vote on an issue that they want to go a certain way. But if it isn't a matter of that, uh, I'm not sure what's going on. That we are dividing into camps and tribes, and there is this unaccountable hatred for the other. As I've often said, I have friends who are communists, Satanists, Moonies, Mormons, uh, fundamentalists, traditional Catholics, more. I love that diversity. There's an anecdote in the beginning of Gary North's book, Theonomy and Christian Ethics. He's one of these Christian Reconstructionist guys, put the Bible into the Constitution. He says, as he was driving his car away from seminary, all packed up for the last time, he was waving goodbye to a friend who yelled to him, "Remember, truth before friendship." Well, to me, that is fanaticism. For me, it's friendship before truth. I can discuss what the truth is with my friends, but there's no chance of discussing it with somebody who won't talk to me.
Yeah. So most of our conversation, and this question is going to be quite relevant to the final area we're going to be probing, which is, okay, we're talking about dilemmas, trilemmas, difficult situations, parents crying overnight, contemplating this decision, hard times, people are upset, and a decision has to be made. But then so we're talking about sort of moral, ethical compasses colliding, difficult decisions. Then the government can come and legislate laws around that, where you are condemned for making a certain choice. Do you think that this sort of thing should be done within legal frame, or should be left at the sort of the within the group or the dynamics of a family to make a decision? Because even if they chose to abort, they're gonna have to live with that consequence, which in its own right can be quite punishing.
Well, I do believe that innocent life should be protected by the state. And so abortion on demand should be illegal. I think late term abortions should be illegal. There are, for example, so a law prohibiting abortion would have to be nuanced, but that would be possible to do, because you could still leave gray areas where the state will not tell you what to do, like some of the things I've mentioned that I don't dogmatize about. I don't think that would be difficult. And if you just had to get an abortion for whatever reason, career advancement or something, and the law in your state would not let you do it, it's not that tough to go to another one that would. That's the way it used to be before Roe versus Wade. And some people don't seem to understand what the nature of this controversial, what repealing Roe versus Wade, Roe versus, good God, what the, I've just forgotten it. Roe versus Wade. Then what it would involve, it wouldn't outlaw abortion, right? It just says, okay, the federal government's staying out of this one. It goes back to the states. And you can have the same debates in every one of the 50 states, and they will decide, their voters. So if you couldn't get one, I'm sure there's states like New York and Massachusetts and California, Oregon, where there's no question but that abortion would remain legal in all cases. And there are other ones where you wouldn't be able to get it in most situations, but it couldn't be that tough to find a place where you could get it if you had to get one.
Yeah. See, when you utter the sentence of abortion on demand, something isn't right. So you're right there. You're that sort of term, abortion on demand, that doesn't sound right to me. Oh, I had a change of mind. I don't feel like it. That sort of thing is, yeah, I can understand that where that sort of needs to be stopped. It's silly. But on the other hand, we've sort of come to a conclusion where certain situations, but you got to look quite carefully and you got to contemplate quite hard on the decision. But ultimately, he said, well, they're going to live with that particular decision. If it was you, you would probably do something slightly different, but that's you and that's them. But you would you would not condemn them for making that decision.
No, and I don't think it would be illegal. I mean, most of the time, for whatever this is worth, when I hear pro-life people saying what they would like to see legislated, they always say, of course, with exceptions for rape and incest and so on. I'd be surprised if any state outlawed abortion even for those conditions. I just doubt seriously anybody's going to do that. So they would be leaving open the gray zones that I'm leaving open. I'm no legislator, but in terms of what I think ought to be, I think I'm probably in the mainstream of pro-life people.
Interesting. This conversation started with you being a pro-life and I am a pro-choice. But then on the face of it, we sound like we're going to collide. But as we kind of dissected the situation, I think we found so much in common.
Amen.
As we sort of uncovered the nuances of the situation. So I'm hoping that this could be a signal for a lot of people out there to try to converse with those who you might disagree with, because you might find so much in common once you discuss the details.
Yeah. And that's why we're doing this, to try to model that and advocate for it.
This is wonderful. I'm hoping that everybody enjoyed this conversation. I'm thinking of something a little bit different next time. I'm thinking of putting 3 topics on my channel for people to vote on. 3 controversial next topic. It's like a poll that you can issue on your YouTube channel, and people can vote. And so we can talk about either vegetarianism. We pick 3 difficult topics that people are sort of split around, and then people can choose something and we can talk about next, Bob. What do you reckon?
What's the we can talk about this. And you said one other sentence I didn't quite hear.
I said we'll post 3 different topics: vegetarianism, and what else would we want to talk about? Something? Do you have something in mind that has been controversial for quite some time that you wanted to get out?
Would pacifism be one?
Oh yeah, interesting. Interesting.
And, let's see.
That's very interesting, pacifism, because that's going to have a lot of biology and a lot of yeah.
Do you need religion to have morality?
Yes, yeah. That's brilliant. Okay, we got 3 topics that we're going to put on a poll very soon. You folks get to choose, and whoever gets whichever topic gets the biggest votes, we are going to cover next weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Bob, do you have anything to conclude with?
Just that I very much appreciate the interest of viewers and listeners, because this is so important socially. And I know it sounds almost absurd, but I fully expect there are going to be people who, because of the prevailing climate in our country, are going to be genuinely surprised that people can have discussions like this. I mean, that's the way I felt when I saw on the news at a Black Lives Matter rally with a bunch of conservative Republicans or something, I don't know, but opponents came to protest, and they wound up hugging and taking pictures together. I thought, holy mackerel, if that can happen once, it can happen more times. Maybe we'll be lucky enough that some people will find that here.
Yes, I'm hoping that this will be I think as we advance as a civilization, we need to get rid of those sort of emotional urges, our apish urges to fight and bang on our chests, and cool it down, sit, have a drink, and chat it away. See if we can make sense of this mayhem all together.
Yeah. Yep.
Brilliant. Bob, you know what I think of you. You're a brilliant friend now, and I'm very, very thankful. Thank you so much. All right, well, folks, until next weekend, hopefully you stay healthy and thoughtful.
Mm.